Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Chase is just going to come whenever he wants, I guess. He's out there finishing his coffee. Some other folks out there I won't call out. Okay, well, welcome. Hope everyone had a lovely carnival weekend. At Punahou, for the last number of years, the Tuesday after carnival has been what we call Curriculum Day. This year, instead of an in-service just for Punahou teachers, we are thrilled to be hosting the Brain Symposium at a new time of year to increase accessibility for our own faculty and to create an opportunity during the year to connect with teachers from other schools. The Punahou School Brain Symposium began in 2010 based on the awareness that our understanding of how learning happened in the brain, as that improved, we would necessarily need to reconsider many of our long-held practices as educators. Now we understand even more deeply the advances in mind-brain education are more than just things that educators should know a little bit about. Rather, they're critical core competencies for designing learning environments and teaching in the 21st century. For educators, there is no professional development more relevant and meaningful than the learning that you're engaging in today. Another hallmark of the Punahou Brain Symposium has been to engage in this learning in partnership with our colleagues and friends from other schools. We'd like to take a moment to welcome these colleagues today. So if you've joined us from another school besides Punahou, can you just wave and say hello? Yay. A favorite, Olelo no Eao, reminds us of the importance of coming together for this work. Auhe pau kaike I ka halau ho'okahi. I hope I did okay. All knowledge is not learned in just one school. Thank you for being here to deepen our understanding of your work and to share the knowledge, or ike, that you bring from your schools with those of us who teach and learn here at Punahou. In our first Brain Symposium in 2010, we were joined by Frank Cross and have since hosted great thinkers including David Eagleman, John Medina, Daniel Spiegel, Carol Dweck, and Dan Pink. These scholars and writers have been an important part of our Brain Symposium experiences, but the most important part of these events has always been gathering educators together to learn and discuss the implications that they see for their own practice. We are committed to creating professional development experiences that serve you as teachers and have the effect of improving work in service of students. This year, we invited Punahou faculty to participate in the Brain Symposium design team. Could all the members of the design team please stand up to be recognized? Stand up. Of that K-12 team, a subset of the group took the lead on ideating and designing this experience today. Would Mo, Allison, Darren, and Deb please stand up to be recognized? There's Darren. They're like too busy working to be recognized, I guess. And finally, one more introduction before introducing Tracy. Renee Chang, are you in the house? She's outside. Renee is the coordinator of professional programs, is the most detail-oriented person on the planet. Running an event for over 400 people on a day when you have no access to food services or physical plant, no problem. Renee, from the bottom of our hearts and our minds, thank you for all you do. We're so fortunate to have Dr. Tracy Tokuhama Espinosa here with us today for our Brain Symposium. Tracy is currently an educational researcher affiliated with Flasco in Quito, Ecuador, and teaches a course at Harvard University Extension School called The Neuroscience of Learning, an Introduction to Mind, Brain, Health, and Education Science. 2 Punahou faculty members took her course this fall, Ali Maramoto and James Street, and we hope to have an even larger cohort take the course in the fall of 2017. She is a former member of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development expert panel to redefine teachers' new pedagogical knowledge thanks to contributions from technology and neuroscience. She has taught kindergarten through university, served as the director of the Institute of Teaching and Learning and director of online learning at the Universidad San Francisco de Quito. In that post, she sought to improve the quality of education through research, teacher training, and student support. Tracy works with schools and has presented research in 31 countries around the world. Now that's where she's presented, not even where she's been. She has more than 27 years of teaching, administrative, and research experience and believes firmly in the power of a single teacher to change many lives. Tracy's current research focuses on the integration of mind, brain, and education science into teachers' daily practice and professional development. Changes in curriculum to enhance early math and pre-literacy skills, bilingualism and multilingualism, the 5 pillars of neuroconstructivism, and the leveraging of technology to enhance learning outcomes. In her latest book, Making Classrooms Better, 50 Practical Interventions of Mind, Brain, and Education Science, she explains John Hattie's meta-analysis of 900 meta-analyses on what influences student learning outcomes based on cognitive and educational neuroscience. Tracy's vision is to better the social, democratic, and economic structures of countries through a better prepared and better educated population. She strongly believes in the active role of universities and schools as change agents to influence public policy. Tracy has not been an ordinary keynote speaker, but rather been a co-creator of this experience with our faculty. She has been working directly with the design team all fall to deepen their understanding of this material and create the day that you're experiencing today. She is a brilliant scholar and writer, and as you will see, an engaging speaker. And most importantly, she comes to this work with a core belief about the kind of learning that kids deserve to have in schools. And she works tirelessly to ensure that we, as educators, have all the tools we need to create environments that support Carnival. To create the environments that support the success and well-being of our students for the good of our shared future. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Tracy Tokuhama Espinosa.
Thank you. That's so sweet. Generous. Good morning. Good morning. Is this on? We're good to go? Thank you very much. How many of you did come to Carnival? How many of you ate the malasas? Yes. I arrived on Saturday, and everybody there, oh yeah, did you pick up the malasas? They brought the malasas. Did you go? And I was working. They had no voice because they'd been working at one of the booths. So anyways, thank you guys for coming. I hope you're re-energized after having a little bit of a rest yesterday. I want to say, everybody's been saying thank you. We start with thank yous, right? Thank you, Punahou, for letting me come here to your beautiful campus. Yesterday I had a walk around, talk about Renee and detail-oriented. It was sort of like step by step. This is how we get from each place to the other venue, and this is where the microphone is, and Darren was so helpful there. But not only seeing your beautiful campus, but coming back to Hawaii. And I say coming back because, yes, ever since I was like 1, we would come back with my dad, who grew up in Aiea. And every couple of years we would come, well, we were here actually every summer. That's me on the right-hand side with my sisters, right? And that's me climbing a tree when I was a teenager. That's what you do in the 70s when there's not a lot of TV around. But I also found out I had a whole lot of cousins and nephews who have also been here, and so, or are here right now. Be nice to them. They are good people. But when I asked my dad, I told my dad, oh yeah, I get to go to Punahou School. And he goes, yeah, did you know Auntie Eleanor was a graduate from there in 1956. So anyways, that's my Auntie Eleanor, that's my dad, just right next to him. So anyways, it does sort of feel like coming home. So thank you very much for the invitation. I also wanted to say thank you to all of you as teachers. I seriously, 150% believe this is the most important job in society. You guys have a buy-in on that? Yeah? This is the most important job in society. Maybe your paycheck doesn't reflect that, but definitely, it's because we have, it's the only institution where people, well, it's the one they'll spend most time in, social institution, right? But it's also the only thing that really has the power to change society. So the values that you guys create or help the kids develop here is really so important because it does affect all of our societies. I also believe, I always make parallels between medicine and education. Our first rule is the same as doctors. Do no harm. Which means that we should be really, really sure of our educational practice. And that means not just doing what the latest and greatest fad book says, or believing maybe in so many neuromyths because they come up in the popular press so frequently, right? But actually looking at evidence-based research to found our process, so to make sure that we're actually using things that we know work and for what reason. I also believe in this sort of saying that the more you know, the more you can know. And from a neuroscientific perspective, this has to do with connections. You guys know Einstein? Good old Einstein? Einstein was kind of smart, right? But he didn't have a particularly big brain. Actually, he had a smaller brain. He was a smaller man, had a smaller brain. But what did he have more than Joe Average? connections, right? He had many more connections, a lot more white matter track in his brain, a lot more connections between parts of his brains than other things. And what did that mean? He had accustomed himself to thinking outside of the box. How does this piece of knowledge maybe connect to this piece of knowledge, maybe connect to this other piece of knowledge? So being able to unify the way that you can think, to think of something new and different. And this is what we hope for our kids, right? When we look for innovative kids, kids who know how to problem solve in different ways, is how can they make those connections? So what we want to try to do today is connect what you already know about grade teaching, because you're already great teachers, but connect it to some new information that we might have from other sciences to contribute to our knowledge of how humans learn. I also believe that the person who does the work is the person who does the learning, which means I know that one-off professional developments where somebody stands up here and talks to you don't work. I know they don't work. In fact, Darling Hammond's research shows they don't work. They only work if you guys have a long-term buy-in. If you guys decide you're going to extend the knowledge that happens here, accept the invitations that we're going to be giving you to say, okay, now how does this change my practice tomorrow? What will I do differently? Okay, I'm going to begin to document and see, does this really make a difference or not? And I will make a change. And I will be inviting you. Some of you saw my email up there. I love getting emails from teachers who care about their own classrooms. So if you begin to do some application of this information and then find, I'm at a brick wall, I'm not sure how to take this further, write to me. I do, seriously, sincerely, want to support you. I love working with teachers who care about improving their practice. So with that, I need somebody with a great radio voice. Who's got a great radio voice? Oh yeah, everybody's looking at somebody over here. Who are you looking at? Who's Rocky? Rocky, where are you? Rocky? Come here, Rocky. Is this one also working? I'm going to put something up and I'd like you to read it with the most emotion you possibly can, okay? Okay? Make us proud, all right? You ready?
The whole thing?
The whole thing. Ooh, that is a good voice.
A frightening conclusion. I have come to a frightening conclusion. I am the decisive element in the classroom. It is my personal approach that creates the climate. It is my daily mood that makes the weather. It is a teacher. As a teacher, I possess a tremendous power to make a child's life miserable or joyous. Sorry, I have a floating contact. I can be a tool of torture or an instrument of inspiration. I can humiliate or humor, hurt or heal. In all situations, it is my response that decides whether a crisis will be escalated or de-escalated, and a child humanized or dehumanized.
Thank you. Very nice voice. Anyways, I hope some of you cried a little. No. This is actually connected to neuroscience, believe it or not. There's a wonderful new field of study called social contagion. It's how individuals actually change other individuals. And they do these studies by hooking people up to brainwaves to actually measure how in sync they get during certain exchanges of messages, which is fascinating. And some studies going on in Japan right now actually trying to test what types of interventions in classrooms create this kind of sweet spot of stress. Like you want people to be sort of stressed but not wacko stressed, right? You want them to have this nice sweet spot to be able to teach into, to see where it is, what types of interventions work with what types of individuals. So anyways, this whole idea of, yes, I can change the weather in my classroom. Yeah, I'm in charge of that. I'm in charge of this whole environment here. And that makes a huge difference because today, some of you will be talking about this idea of the connection between affective neuroscience, which is how we feel about things, and how that is directly related to cognition, how you're able to think. So how do your emotions influence how you're able to think, okay? So anyways, that's a sort of a brief introduction. I also want to say thank you to this Brain 6. They actually have that at the bottom of their email, right? They call themselves the Brain 6, right? So we have, Emily, Paris, Darren, we have Allison. Renee, you're not as easy to Google as the others. I have the dog picture. Thank you, Deb and Kathy, for all the exchanges of information. But I also wanted to say a special thank you, because these are people who didn't have to contact me, but they did. A special thank you to Todd and to Chase, because they sent me their video of them rapping about the whole MBE concept. And in 2 minutes and 26 seconds, if you guys haven't had a chance to see this, you got to see it. They summarize the big concept I'm about to explain to you in the next hour. So anyways, if you get a chance, watch their video. It was absolutely fabulous. So thank you very much. Are they here? They're here? Where are you? Can I have your autograph? That was like so cool. That was so fun. That was really fun. I was laughing out loud to myself at home. Okay, so as Emily mentioned, I do teach this course at Harvard. It's called the Neuroscience of Learning. It was wonderful to be able to have Allison and James in the class. They were amazing students, but not only that, they were trying to defy, there's a myth, they believed it was a myth, it's actually a truth. Do you think that sleep impacts your ability to learn? Okay, so what happens when you have a 9 a.m. course on the East Coast? What did they do? 3 in the morning, they would get up at 3 in the morning once a week to come and be with us, which was kind of amazing that they learned anything at all. But anyways, no, they did it. They were wonderful contributors to the course. So are they, everybody is, I saw Allison and James. Hello, how are you? It's so great to see you. Like, you guys are all taller in person. You get like this talking head the whole semester, and it's like all of a sudden, oh, hi, Allison. Hi, James. Okay, I want to go back to this picture that I showed you before, because not only did we used to come here every single summer, but we got married here with my husband, and these are my kids. I just wanted to call attention to, do you see how we went on vacation? What is that? To keep us quiet on that airplane flight, my mom would have this big book. The reason my parents aren't here anymore is because my dad went to UC Berkeley, where he met my mom. They eloped, and then they came back here. Actually, that's kind of like parentheses, because I was born, that's why they eloped. This was Berkeley, California in the 60s, okay? So anyways, we would come back, but my parents like really determined to have this kind of academic, let's have fun, but also let's think about this kind of a mode. Do you see how we went on the airplanes? Do you see this lug of notebooks and coloring books and letter books and all these other things? This was vacation for us, okay? But anyway, so some people, raise your hands, do you think teachers are born teachers? I mean, this is a vocation. You're born a teacher. Or do you think that teaching is teachable? Can you teach people to be teachers? How many of you think it's an innate vocation? So everybody believes it's teachable? Having said that, how many of you feel like I was born to be a teacher? Okay, so there's still some people here. Okay, great. Well, I'm glad that you think it's teachable, because otherwise, what's the point of being here, right? So you think there are things that we can get out of today's talk. So what we want to look at is basically, Emily mentioned that I was lucky enough to be asked to serve on a panel that tried to determine teachers' new pedagogical knowledge. That's basically, we know that teachers need to know their content knowledge. Like all teachers need to know, if you're a math teacher, you need to know your math, right? If you're a science teacher, you need to know your science. But how do you teach that, right? And since 1989, they hadn't redone this with the OECD nations, which are a group of 34 nations, of which the United States is one of them, right? So there was this big think tank going on for about a year on what is it now that teachers really need to know about how to teach this generation of students. Everybody goes on and on about 21st century, this, that, and the other thing, but what does that mean in practice? How do we shift? What has really shifted, right? And so in coming up with this, the publication actually comes out next March, next month, which is a recommendation to all the ministries of education in all these countries of saying, you should motivate your teacher colleges to include certain things. What are the 2 biggies that have changed since 1989? 2 big things that have changed on society's landscape since 1989. Internet. So, technology. The use of technology, either in tools or access to knowledge. And what's the other big thing? Brain. Information, good information about the brain. The early information about the brain in the decade of the brain in the 90s was a lot of mythical stuff because we had poor brain imaging. So we used to think, say all the words that, all animals that begin with the letter D. And then we'd do a neuroimaging scan and we'd say, look, he's using less than 10% of his brain. So we would think, based on the poor technology at the time, that that was a truth. But now technology has advanced so much that there are new things that teachers need to know. But this kind of leaves you guys in a lurch, because you guys didn't just step out of college, right? You guys didn't just come off the boat from a teacher training program that had all this information. So there's this big gap in information for teachers who are in practice right now, who really need to fill in those kind of gaps in their knowledge about technology and about the brain and learning, which is why I like to talk to teachers about sort of filling or looking into those gaps. So when I look at what's really new and current, what kinds of research are going on in the field, and then I'm going to ask you, remember I said the person who does the work is the person who does the learning? Fascinating new research that shows that actually testing enhances learning, but that's a misnomer. Testing, frequent testing, and especially, hopefully, ungraded, helps enhance learning. Why would it enhance learning? What element of learning does telling a kid, oh yes, there's a quiz every single day? Every single day. Why would that be helpful? It reduces stress about the idea of having evaluations, but why else? They're getting feedback on their knowledge, but why else? I'm going to give you a hint. The two huge pillars, there is no new learning without memory and attention. If you don't have memory or you don't have attention, you have no learning. So you have to have those two big pieces, right? So what would frequent testing actually help? You can pay attention to your mistakes, but you can also strengthen routes for new learning. Your memory systems get strengthened by actually recalling it and applying it in a new context. Recalling it and applying it in a new context, right? So anyways, this is why I'm going to give you a little quiz. To sort of enhance that and help you remember certain concepts that we're going to have, okay? So then I'm going to give you, some of you said, what was that last word? Yes. As I mentioned before, professional development only works when it's an extended process. This is very, very clear. One-off visit by somebody who parachutes in for a couple hours makes absolutely no difference in an individual teacher's or a school's performance. Sorry to say that. So total number of hours of professional development doesn't really help. What does help is when a teacher owns something. This is a piece of information I want to get better at. I'm going to try to change this. I'm going to document my practice. I'm going to see what works and doesn't work. So making this a more personalized experience is what's part of the homework. I'm going to challenge you to choose something that you're going to actually try to apply for the rest of the semester, the rest of the school year, and follow up on it. Did this work? Did this make a difference? Am I a better teacher because of this? Okay? And I want to accompany you in that process, okay? All right, so biggest challenges that we have in education right now. If I were to ask you, what is the number one challenge of student success in a classroom? What would you say? All students should be able to succeed. Do we agree? We would hope. Okay. So, but what's the biggest challenge? What is the biggest challenge to those kids? Don't tell me, tell your neighbor, just to see if you guys have consensus, just to see if between the two people, okay, to me the biggest challenge is X, clearly X. Just see, what is the biggest challenge? The number one, in order to understand the challenge, you need to also understand the number one influencing factor for student learning outcomes is the student's own self-perception as a learner. I can do it. I can do it. However, who makes them feel that way? Okay, so number one biggest challenge we have basically our teacher attitudes. You guys, all of us, we have biases. We think things about kids. We have attitudes about how people learn, about what is intelligence, right? And what I want to challenge you today is to push you out of that comfort zone, okay? You've lived 40, 50, 60, no 70-year-olds in here, right? You've lived many, many years just sort of accepting or thinking, are there? Or you made the, oh, I'm so sorry, 70. Bow to experience. Okay. We need to, I want you to think about this deeply in your hearts, because it is something that nobody's going to say out loud. And on the surface of all things, oh yeah, we treat everybody equally. Oh yeah, we're very, I have no biases. Oh no. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. We all do. And the quicker we can get those to the surface and sort of, I own that. I'm going to try to get better at it. Some of you think things like, well, I think there's some sayings here. If only the parents were more responsible, or they gave better genes and that kid was better, or if only the children were better behaved, or if only I had more resources, or if only the kids would eat or sleep better, or if only my classes were smaller, if only the kids played less video games or whatever it is. You guys presume that would make you then a better teacher, because you're up against the world, right? All this stuff is at you. Well, here's the very interesting thing. You, as an actor, are the only one that can change that kid's perception of himself as being a learner. I can do this. I can do this. But how do you do that? In subtle ways. And you can't do it with false praise. And you can't give stickers to everybody all the time because it's meaningless, right? So you have to find some way to actually connect with that kid and to say, I do believe in you. It is possible. My dad is a wonderful teacher. He was a teacher for 40-something years, and he taught in the public schools in Berkeley, California, and he went to UC Berkeley on a nuclear physics scholarship and changed his major to be a teacher, because this was Berkeley, California in the 60s. Let's go save the world, right? And so his saving the world was fascinating to me, because he went to the worst school district. It's called Richmond. It's still pretty bad. But he went there and he said, yeah, he's going to go change some lives. And he did. He really did. He had the F Club. These were kids who had actually failed multiple times in mathematics classes. And the only thing this guy did was make them believe in themselves. Yeah, it's not that it's really that hard. You got the right head for this. I know you can do this. It's just a matter, let's approach it this way. What do you think now? Oh yeah, Mr. Toke, I can do this. Okay, so basically, the idea was sort of making them believe in themselves. And that was a very hard job. But anyways, we believe things, and I want you to sort of try to identify this morning, if you can, what are your own personal biases? And they can be in all kinds of ways. Girls do things differently than boys. Myth, fact? Come tomorrow night when I talk to the parents, I'll give you a long explanation. But you presume things of certain people. All those Asian kids are so much faster than those other kids and whatever. The kids from that zip code tend to be so poorly equipped for certain things because they come from certain schools. Or, those are social things, but brain things. How does your brain learn? You have presumptions. You think, oh, well, if this happens, and this happens, and it clicks, right? Some of you think the only way to get that in their heads is to repeat it 1,000 times, because that's the only way I remember the periodic table. Okay, so basically you presume that people learn the way you learn, because it's the only brain you've been able to examine, right? So this is the cool thing about this new field, is we're trying to share broader perspectives. This is how multiple brains tend to learn this particular thing. This is why we should take advantage of these types of different activities or methodologies, right? So what I want you to think about this morning are, what are your own maybe biases or thoughts about, well, I always thought the brain learned in X way, or I always thought certain populations learned in whatever way, okay? Think about that so that we can maybe sort of shake that all up and come up with some new information during the morning, okay? Okay, so teachers' new pedagogical knowledge, where does this all come from? It's this idea, can we mix up information from the neurosciences, from technology, from the studies on differentiation learning, from studies related to affect and learning, how do emotions influence learning outcomes, right? Can we mix all of these things up to have a new way that we train teachers, or we help teachers understand this dynamic within the classroom, okay? And based on that, comes up with this new idea. Do you have as good a voice as the other guy?
Sure.
Can you read the first one?
Designing educational experiences without an understanding of the brain is like designing a glove without an understanding of the human hand.
What does that mean? That's also a very good voice, by the way. You should go into radio too. Yeah, very good voice. Yeah, I like that. What does that mean? It sort of means that right now, you guys think the brain is not a simple organ, right? It's probably the most complicated thing in the universe. The problem is, do teachers know enough about the organ of all of their existence? You guys are in the business of learning. The only thing that learns is your brain. Do you know about your brains? I want to make you feel like you should need to know more than you might know right now. Not just anatomy, but how things actually, what are learning processes like? How do you really get something into long-term memory? Why is it that we presume that certain kids, okay, you give them all the same homework? That to me has always seemed like the strangest thing. Because all learning is based on a filter of prior experience. For example, any math teachers here? Anybody do second grade, first grade, second grade? No? You guys don't do math in second grade? No. Okay. So what would happen if you know kids, right? If they have a really good grasp of addition, you can probably teach them subtraction. It takes very little time. It takes about an average of about 10 steps. This is Robert Marsano's research on how much repetition is necessary. But that's if somebody has a really strong foundation in prerequisite knowledge. If a kid has gaps in addition, and then we try to teach him subtraction on top of that, it can take you 20, 30, 40, 50 repetitions of the same task before the kid gets those basic core concepts, right? So what this means, it's silly to tell all the kids, go home and everybody do questions 1 through 5. No, because, Mary might need 1 through 5, but Tom is going to need 1 through 55. I mean, they're going to need to rehearse things more because they don't have certain foundations, okay? So part of the idea is understanding a little bit more about how brains work, making presumptions. We can't presume that all kids at X age are ready to do subtraction. Their prior experiences, which we don't know a lot about, actually more heavily influence their ability to learn than their age. The chronological age means nothing, actually, in comparison to cognitive stages of development and prior experiences, okay? So this means, sorry that's so microscopic there, this means that new pedagogical knowledge, the way that teachers are now being trained in teacher colleges, is looking at this combination of information from neuroscience, basic information about how the brain and learning processes, right? Psychology, these elements of how you feel about what you're learning influence in what you can learn, as well as all the old stuff. This means it's harder and harder to be a great teacher. You have to have more and more information because we're nurturing ourselves with other sciences than we did from before, okay? So this means when we talk about this new field, mind-brain education was founded in around 2011 with the establishment of the International Mind-Brain Education Society. If you're interested, it's www.imbes.org. They have access to their journal. It's called the Journal of Mind-Brain Education, and it's meant to look at these very interesting studies that are of interest to teachers as well as psychologists as well as to neuroscientists. And they're all extremely well written articles, right? And they're all up there for free, so you can go ahead and look at that. But this means they've created this new international society, which is fascinating, which brings together educators, psychologists, and neuroscientists who want to now try to work together and collaborate. A neuroscientist will come and say, listen, we believe that reading in the brain is working like X. And we've seen some brain scans and some studies here. Does your class want to participate? Great. And then they do before and after scans, and they do interventions, and they work with teachers, with real people, instead of all the little lab rats, because, sorry, most of your kids are not lab rats, so it does not make sense to take information from neuroscience that are only based on animal studies. So there's now trying to create the society that works together to resolve problems that we have in education. So one of the things that comes out of this is that the science of psychology or looking even in neuroscience and education, formal education has only been around for about 125 years. And in all that time, and the studies that have come out have looked at how does the brain learn. But almost nobody looks at how to teach. Everybody says, we know it's successful when this connection happens here and this, that, and the other thing. But nobody says, okay, so what do you do to make that happen? Right? So our science is really, really young compared to the other ones. knowing how to teach, not just how the brain learns, but how should I teach to take advantage of that information now. Okay, so, oops, here we go. So this is the idea. So basically, we have, do any of you feel like every year you got it down pat, everybody maximizes their potential, they're all good? If you can, sell us the secret. If you don't know, this is the main idea. We don't have a formula, and this is the biggest frustration for many teachers, is that we always go in knowing it might not be 100% this year because there's always going to be these dips here. And maybe one kid or another kid is going to have certain problems or certain things going on. We never have, it's like you can't have, it's like a sports team, you never have this 100% season or whatever. By the way, were you all sad about, or were you all happy about the Patriots? I went to school in Boston, and my son, who's in Boston now, kept tweeting me throughout. He was like total depression, until like the last 5 minutes of the game. Then he got all happy there. But the idea is this, that we know that we're going to have ups and downs and these problems in education. We don't have a formula yet. So anybody has a Teaching for Dummies book, drop it. It doesn't work. Anybody who tries to sell you this idea that, oh, if you do X, this will work for everybody in your class, or Y methodology is the way to go. There's no one way to do these things, okay? So the idea is that I would like to know if you guys are okay with saying the brain is cool and it's complex, and I'm okay with that. The main criticism of neuroscientists when I go to these conferences is they think that, no, teachers just want the easy answers. They're not willing to work for it. They really don't care about how things work, and I say, you are wrong. I am a teacher and I care, and I know thousands of teachers around the world who care very deeply about knowing a little bit more about those processes so they can be better at what they do. And they can have more evidence for why they do certain things. I know thousands of teachers. So what I'd like to try to convince you is to sort of embrace this idea. Complexity is okay. That's the world we live in, and that's your brain. Your brain is complex, and it's okay to sort of be challenged with some of those ideas, okay? All right, so this means, what are we trying to do? We're going to mix up the idea of mind-brain education, right? We're going to combine this with the work, the educational research from John Hattie's work, which shows this really influences student learning outcomes. And my challenge to you is to say, how do we put this on a professional development scale for teachers that really lasts over your lifetime? Basically, you can begin with certain core concepts, and then in the next PD session, you know what you have to do next. I have to build on this and go deeper here, and go deeper here, and go deeper here. Instead of maybe doing the same thing over and over again, because sometimes, the principal has chosen the topic of the month, and it ends up being something that might be, they think is everybody needs, but look, I already went to 3 conferences on that. I don't need that, right? So what you want to do is to build on this in a logical way, okay? That's the new idea here. So what has better knowledge about the brain told us? And one of the things we looked at in this OECD panel was to see what has really, really changed. And most of what has changed is that we have identified many, 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 many more myths about the brain than we used to believe, okay? And I'll show you a comparative list in just a second. But we have now more refined technology, which gets to the point, instead of having little cartoon drawings, if you see a cartoon like that, like run, okay? That's bad information in general. Because what those things do is promote neuromyths, okay? There are way too many people way back here, and there's like 2 empty rows in the front. Come and sit and be comfortable. This is part of learning. If you're uncomfortable and you're thinking how my feet hurt, you're not going to be thinking about my slides. Come here and look at my slides. Come see my slide. Look, empty, empty, empty. Come. Really, I'm not joking. Okay? Okay, so these are all myths. Right, left brain, artsy brain, logical brain, boy-girl brain, things about using only a percentage of your brain, wacko teenage brains, things like triune brains, having 3 levels, like a limbic system, so you have a reptilian brain, hello? All of those things are myths, okay? When we get better technology, you can actually get down to the level of understanding things like how complicated certain connections are, and how many different neural networks have to be linked before a kid reads. Super complicated, okay? So now you can have appreciation of that and think, okay, so each of those, at least right now, up to 16 different neural networks for pre-reading skills. Before a kid can learn to read, there are 16 different neural networks that have to be primed. And if they're not all going at the same time, the kid can't read, right? But each of those responds to different activities in class. So if teachers don't know that, you might be repeating the same thing over and over again and really reinforcing one of these networks, but you're not taking care of the others. So part of this idea is to be able to understand the complexity of certain skill sets and see how you can do changes in your class that would enhance the learning or the speed or the efficiency of the student, okay? So what is some of the news? We know now there are a lot of studies looking at how does the brain really learn physics or concepts of physics or reading or math or art. We also know that there are other studies, people who are looking in general understanding. So one has to do with domain areas. This has to do with areas of knowledge, right? So you know math or science or art, right? The other one has to do with general thinking. How do people reason? How do memory systems work? How does attention work? How do executive functions get primed and work, okay? And then there's this whole other really cool new area which has to do with things that we had never connected, but everybody realizes, oh wow, that has a huge impact on learning. Like embodied cognition. How does your bodily state influence your understanding of the world? Or how does affect understand your world, make you understand your world? Or circadian rhythms, how is it that your sleep patterns impact drastically your potential to learn? All of you got enough sleep, right? Because they gave you the whole day off yesterday, so you can come in here like, wah, with energy, right? You got it? But what about your kids? Do they come in every day with enough sleep? Have they taken care of their bodies in the right way, like eaten, so that they get to you ready to learn? So there's a huge area here. There's also another area. Any of you who are language teachers, I'd love to talk to you afterwards. The benefits of multilingualism or bilingualism. The early cognitive benefits. Teaching a kid another language in the early years has general benefits for executive functions, inhibitory control, being able to focus on one thing at a time, and which expands working memory, which helps in every other subject area. And on the whole, bilinguals are more successful, multilinguals are more successful in academic tracks, thanks to this early exposure. So why don't all schools teach another language in the early years? Anyways, that's a policy thing. Okay, so this is also the language stuff. We see that there's extended executive functions, enhanced inhibitory control, enhanced neuroplasticity. So this policy change, is there anybody here who has influence? Think about it. There's some very simple things schools could do that would actually benefit every kid, and especially those from lower income status. Laura Ann Petito's work at Harvard showed that if you teach multilingual skills to 8-year-olds from poor neighborhoods, so the kids who were from Spanish neighborhoods in Boston learned English, and the kids from English-speaking poor neighborhoods learned Spanish. They learned literacy skills at 8 years of age. She found that after a year of intervention, she actually ameliorated the effects of poverty. She basically was able to say that normally low-income kids start off low and stay low. But with this intervention of just teaching them another language, they were able to even out the playing field for these kids. There's a lot of benefits to be had from languages. Okay, so the studies that were done in the OECD had to do with coming up with consensus with all of these countries and their ministries of education and saying, what do we think is good information for teachers and what is not so good information for teachers? And they put them into 4 categories, okay? These 4 categories are, what are the 4 categories?
What is well established? What is probably so?
Oh, sorry.
What is intelligent speculation? What is popular misconception or a neuromyth?
Okay, so an example of what is well established is neuroplasticity. Your brain changes every day thanks to experience, right? And your brain can change until when? When does your brain stop being able to adapt? Adolescence, early childhood, when you die. Thank you very much. That must have been one of my students. James, did you say that? I hope so. When you die, your brain can learn until you die. It does learn. It can't help but learning. Actually, it's evolution. Your brain learns to survive. If you don't learn from your mistakes, the species dies out, right? So basically, your brain is primed to learn. You cannot not learn, okay? So that is something that's well established. Neuroplasticity is well established. Something that's probably so is sensitive versus critical periods. What would happen if I told you there is not one critical period that exists for anything you learn in an academic setting. There is no critical period. There may be a critical period for gross motor skills, learning how to walk, and your first language. But there's no critical period for a second, third, fourth, fifth language, or anything like that, right? The reason we say it's probably so is because we don't have enough studies. Basically, there are only about 249 case studies of what are called feral children, like so kids who are like Mowgli, like you get lost in the forest and no contact with language, for example, right? And because there's so few cases, it's very hard to say, this is well established because there's only 200-something cases. But we think that a kid who's been exposed to good language skills, maybe 0 to 3, then gets lost in the jungle, then comes back, that kid actually pretty much develops language. It's fascinating. Not 100% ever, but pretty good. But if a kid is lost in the jungle from birth, then he comes back in an even shorter amount of time, just a year later, he might not gain language. That's what the studies basically show. So we think there might be a critical period for that early language development. Same things, thanks to, it's terrible, but the Romanian, do you guys remember the orphanages? Yeah. Kids who were not allowed to move out of a physical space, like they were basically chained to their little cribs there for many, many years. Even though they would be adopted by nice families, nowadays it's Canada, they don't go to the United States anymore, but when they're adopted, then they develop, you would think that, okay, now they're out of that space, they'll be able to develop. Well, the kids who had been in that situation from very young never got gross motor skills. They were never able to actually really fully develop as well. Okay, so the idea is that there are maybe a critical period for gross motor skills and first language, but there is no critical period for anything else, like learning physics, or learning a second language, or learning math skills, or learning how to read. You could learn to read when you are 2 and a half, or you can learn to read when you're 12 and a half, or when you're 22, or when you're 72. There's no critical period. What's more important has to do with the order of skills that are taught, not the age of the person. Oops, sorry, totally microscopic. I'm conducting another study. It's called International Delphi Panel, where you invite experts from the fields to comment on things. And what is I just wanted to show you this because I think it's this one, yeah. In 2006, when I did this, when we showed educational concepts, things that are in teacher training books, the way teachers go to conferences and the topics of the things that they learn, we sorted those out, and most of the concepts that the teachers were being exposed to were on the mythical side of things. People pay, there's this one guy, no names mentioned, he gets paid thousands of dollars to tell people, when you go into a classroom, make sure you light a candle. Sit in a circle because boys need fire. It's part of our evolution and blah, 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 blah. Okay, so anyways, there's some stuff out there that I hope you guys aren't exposed to, okay? But they're kind of gimmicky. They're gimmicky. And I just have to tell you, it's not your fault. You guys are desperate. I bet all of you are desperate that your students have success, right? You want all your kids to meet with success. So sometimes, desperately, we'll grasp onto anything anybody tells us. I'm going to try that fire thing because nothing else is working with Tommy, right? You'll try anything because you want to be successful. And that's out of the goodness of your heart. But that's not really using your head to come up with the right evidence-based practice, okay? So the idea is to look for good evidence. What we now found, so this is, we talk about things that are well established. These are things that are true for every single brain. For example, all new learning passes through the filter of prior experience. Plasticity occurs throughout your lifetime. There's only 5 of these things, right? But there's also there was this other category of things which were true for everybody, but they had a huge amount of human variation. For example, do you think that sleep is important for learning? Yes. There you go. How much sleep do you think your students should get? I'm going to teach you a really great trick. The answer to every question in education is, it depends. Very good. Very good. It depends. It depends on that individual. How many of you can survive and do well on 4 to 5 hours of sleep? 5 to 6, 6 to 7, 7 to 8, 8 to 9, 9 to 10, 10 to 11, 12. Do I have 13? Okay. The key here is that since there's such huge variation, we can say as a fact, sleep influences student learning. We can say that as a fact. What I cannot say is how much sleep X kid needs. And there's a lot of blah blah going around in the literature. Make sure that your fifth grader is in bed by 8:30. Sorry, maybe that fifth grader doesn't need the same amount of sleep or has different needs as other ones. Obviously, within humanity, there are outliers. The average human being, 4.5 hours to 12 is normal, according to Alan J. Hobson in Harvard University. The average is 8, okay? But that doesn't mean everybody needs that amount of sleep, okay? So make sure that you understand human variation plays a big role in making decisions as teachers, okay? Okay, so what I found with the new research is, unfortunately, we've only increased what's really good information by a little, but there's even more myths out there that are invading the literature with teachers. And myths exist because they tend to be based on partial truths, right? They were true for this rat study, so they might as well be true for the 11th graders in your class, right? Not true, okay? We have to examine the literature really, really well to decide what is acceptable or good evidence, okay? And there's more junk out there than ever before, which means we have to be very, very careful about the information that we use or apply, okay? So what we're going to do is to see what you guys know about this. Here's a quiz. Ta-da! I'm going to ask you a question, and then I want you to consider, is this well established or probably so, or it's intelligent speculation. Intelligent speculation is this. Men and women look different from the outside. So I can intelligently speculate that they must be different on the inside too, right? Their brains look different, right? Unfortunately, that's pretty wrong. It's a wrong assumption to make. There may be some things, and there are mixed studies, but you cannot make that presumption based, it's an intelligent speculation. It has, you say, well, based on what they look like outside, I'll make a choice or decision about inside. It's not necessarily true, okay? And a neuromyth, that's just wrong information. So what's the idea here? Is that the information that is got a lot of evidence, or is probably so, which is true for everybody, but it has human variation, that's good information to use in your classroom. Those are good guides to use on how to teach. But the other stuff, intelligent speculation and myths, are stuff you should just avoid. Just skip over that until we have better information possible out there, but don't use that other information. Why? What did I say the first rule of teachers is? Do no harm. Here's the reason. Most things that are in intelligent speculation and neuromyths do harm. When you tell a girl she doesn't have a brain as good to do science as a boy, that does harm. When you tell a high school student, oh, too bad you didn't learn Spanish when you were little, because right now it's going to be super hard and you'll never get it, that does harm, okay? Those things do harm. Most neuromyths and most things in intelligent speculation do harm, so avoid the things that are on that list, okay? Okay, so I'm going to ask you, I'm going to give you questions, and I want you to read it, think to yourself, and then I want you to see if you have consensus with the people sitting around you. True or false, or is this well established, is it a myth? Human brains are as unique as human faces. Talk to your neighbor, you have exactly 30 seconds to see if you have consensus. There are two whole benches right there, right there.
My back is sore, so
You
standing
sure?
is what I do. Thank you.
Okay. What do you think about this? not going to give you the mic. Because?
I'm going to say that if you're looking at a human brain, they're probably more similar than they are different.
Good.
It depends on how people use them.
Perfect. Okay. So this idea that human brains are as unique as human faces, then you are in agreement.
It's false.
Why would it be false? Because you just said that there would be more similarities than differences. For example, a face, you have 2 ears, 2 ears, 2 ears, you have one nose, 2 eyes, 2 eyes. You have the same parts. Do they have the same faces? No, okay. So this is kind of like the brain, okay? The brain has similar parts, like you were just saying, right? But the idea is there are no 2 brains that are identical. How about identical twins? They actually have the same faces, right, on the outside. Do they have the same brains? No, because what? What changes your brain? Experience. The individual experiences will rewire and change your brains. None of them are identical because of your unique human experiences, okay? So you got to ask yourself then, what does this do or what does this tell you about your teaching? If you know that there are no 2 brains that are absolutely identical, what does that tell you? Does it tell you that we should be investing a little bit more in this idea of differentiation, or treating kids more individually, or figuring out what each kid needs instead of having, this is the way I teach, learn it or don't? That kid might need something that the other kid didn't. Maybe your teaching style resonates, or it's working better with one kid, or the way you've delivered the information works for one guy but it doesn't work for another, okay? How about the next one? 30 seconds. Past information influences how we learn something new. 30 seconds. What do you guys think?
You already told us the answer.
Good. This is just a secret we're listening. Do you know why? So everything is building off of everything else? It's very good. Okay, so let's hear one answer. Go ahead.
Well, I think it's true because that the way that we learn, we learn new things based on what we previously learned, and so I think that our strengths and our weaknesses are determined by what experience we've had previously.
Excellent. And that's a great answer that would generally come out of educational psychology. What about neuroscience? Does anybody have a neuroscientific explanation about why this is true? It is true, by the way. It is true. But why?
What we already know is established at a neurological level with connections, dendrites, whatever, and so in order to learn something, we have to connect it to the connections that are already there.
Exactly. So basically, the way your brain learns, and how do you learn about your world? How do you learn about anything? Anything. Aristotle's, through your senses, okay? You learn about your world through your senses, right? But what happens when you have sensory input from your fingers or your mouth or your nose? Okay, you have sensory input, travels up the spine, goes into the brain, and the first thing it does is it runs through a quick filter between the amygdala and the hippocampus saying, hi, memory, do I already know something about this? Basically, to conserve energy. You are so smart, your brain is so smart, and it's so efficient that it doesn't want to relearn everything every single time. The first thing it does is see, do I know something about this already? Which is why when the kid is faced with subtraction, if he can look at addition and say, oh, I know something about that. Okay, it's just the symbols that are looking a little different. If he can make that association, he learns more efficiently and faster. Your brain just does that naturally. It looks for what it already knows beforehand in order to then decide, okay, I got to expend energy on this because it's totally new, okay? So the first idea is, what do I already know? So it always passes through the filter of prior experience. So how does this impact your teaching? If I were to ask you, does this, now knowing that prior experience is fundamental to being able to teach something new, what would that mean about you in your classroom? What do you have to do? already know what they already know. That means knowing your students. If you need to know what the students already know in order to decide, okay, is this too high, too low for them? You need to know them well enough. Do you know your students well enough? Do you know what kind of prior understanding they already have of information, okay? So you need to know your students well enough to be able to take advantage of the prior experience they already have to teach something new. How about this one? Making decisions with a cool head and without emotion helps you think better. You have 1 minute for this one because I think it'll be hotly contested. Sports coaches? Yeah? Good guess, huh? Good guess. Hey there. Huh?
I said you were so cute. Oh my God, I love this. And everybody's engaged. And we all need something in China, so like if you've done miracles.
Good. Oh, good. Oh, this is funny. Hi, you look like somebody I know.
Really?
Yeah, so weird. Yeah. Okay.
I'm going to be your mic person, so I'll be taking this.
Oh, then I'll give you this, just in case. I'll just point to you. Okay, remember I told you there is this big new field. It's called affective neuroscience. And this big field of affective neuroscience has to do with feelings, and it's linked to cognition, right? Okay, so where does this come about? It's really fascinating because all teachers kind of know this in their gut, but neuroscientists, had to do all these studies to sort of establish these things. How many of you think that you can make a decision without emotions? Nobody dares. It's actually impossible because there is no way. Remember we just said, okay, information comes in through your sensory perception, right? It goes up. Absolutely, the very first stop it makes is it quickly stops in at the amygdala to say, is this anything that I should be fearful of? Run away, save my life. Okay, do I need to do any of these things? Then it goes less than a split second. It goes frontal lobe and it comes back to the hippocampus and it does a double check. Really? Like it confirms whatever the amygdala sent the message to. So the first thing, your brain is so smart. It tries very hard to preserve the body because that's where the brain is. Like without the body, the brain doesn't do anything, right? So if you guys know the classic thing, right? You're walking and you jump for no reason. You don't know why you were startled. You don't even know consciously that you jumped, right? But you jumped. You said, oh, I thought that was a snake. But it was just a wire, okay? What happened there is that your amygdala said, whatever, better safe than sorry, jump, right? So the very first thing is that your brain does is says, be wary, right? So the emotional check, the channel of emotional memories comes first, but then a split second later, then we get this cognitive reflection within the hippocampus. Are you sure that was a snake? No, silly, that was a wire, okay. And that's why you automatically deflate, right? But the first reaction is always, it passes through the filter of emotional memory before it does through a cognitive understanding of the information. So, what does this mean in a classroom setting? There is, and I don't know why, do you understand anxiety in learning? Anybody ever felt anxious when you're learning something? Or never? No. You think your kids feel anxious sometimes? Okay, believe it or not, you teachers know this, but there is only one subject area where there's actual documentation of anxiety. What subject is that? Math anxiety. Everybody knows that, right? Okay, very strange. Okay, and the research in math anxiety is very, very interesting, and it has a lot to do with this concept. The kids Remember we said the number one influencing factor that helps kids learn, that influences student learning outcomes, is what the kid thinks of himself as a learner. I can do this, okay? There apparently is nothing that makes a kid feel he can't do something more than repeated math failure. I mean, being told, come on, you just need to practice some more. You're not trying hard enough, right? And the kid's like, it's not going in, it's not going in. And the kid feels helpless and they presume they can't. I cannot do this. Now, even if you are, now they were in a terrible elementary school, they come to Punahou later on, and you are the nicest, best math teacher in the world, the first thing that hits this kid when he walks into math class, self-preservation. This is a panic situation. This is where I was humiliated before. This is where I hurt before. This is where I felt stupid before, right? So the very first thing, association with a past memory that relates to something emotional context, will block the student. Now, why is that neuroscientifically? What is actually happening in the brain? It's not psychological. I mean, it sounds psychological. It is actually neuroscientific. What happens when your brain is ready to be in a panic or worried or anxious, right, is that combination of neurotransmitters does not permit another combination of neurotransmitters necessary to make connections, to really learn. Literally, a high anxiety brain is not going to learn, can't learn, because there is not the right chemistry going on to make those connections. So physiologically speaking, that kid is frozen in his tracks. Now, can you try to repress what is a natural state of emotion? Absolutely. Those of you who answered, you were probably Navy SEALs, right? You guys know, you know how your natural instinct, you're being pushed underwater and your natural instinct is, you're going to breathe in and you're going to die, right? But you can repress that. You can repress that absolute panic and learn to get over that, and then you can do your task. You were a Navy SEAL. You're nodding like so true. So is it possible? Yeah, you can do that with a lot of training. But normal human beings and most kids in your class will actually make that association, and emotions will override cognition. If a child is stressed, depressed, anxious, they will not learn. They're not going to learn. Just because neurochemically speaking, it will not allow for the connections to be made. Okay? Big information. Now, this actually makes me ask you then, what is happening in your classrooms? I mean, how does that information change what you do in your classrooms? Are you managing the right levels of stress in your classrooms? Keeping people alert, but not in panic, making people feel like they can achieve? Okay, next question. True or false? People judge each other's faces and tones of voices immediately and almost unconsciously. Yeah, I'm good. I think so. Any feedback for me? Want me to do something differently, slower, faster?
No, I think it's good. Yeah, I guess Candace. Okay, yeah, everything's good.
What do you think? What do you think? Think it's true?
I think it's true.
Yeah. Do you have any evidence for that, or do you just know?
I just
Candace? Sorry?
say you look nice today in two different ways.
Ah, great. Great example. Can I get you to answer that? Just to say this? Okay, a perspective here. True or false, or well established or not well established? Go ahead. Go ahead. Yep.
I think this is true, and the example we thought about was that you can say you look nice today in two different tones, and it'll be taken two different ways, or many different ways.
You've learned that from experience?
Yes.
Okay. This is actually research done by Amamble in University of San Francisco. It's fascinating. What she actually found is that students, she did this like looking at university students interacting with a new teacher who walked in. And the students, within 15 seconds, has already decided this is a good teacher or a bad teacher. Just based on how they carried themselves, the way they began to talk, and all the rest of it. But then, what she found was more intriguing, and I find this fascinating actually, is that if you took away the sound of the class, they would watch recordings also, you could watch, let me think. You had the real students in the class, and then you had students just watching the video of the class, they had the same emotion. But if you took away the sound on the video, the students could they still have the same kind of judgment of that teacher. So it wasn't actually what was being said, it was how that person carried themselves as far as body language was concerned, but mainly facial expression. You can tell the kids, don't worry, you're doing just fine. And what you said, and you can also tell the parents, but I told him he was doing just fine. You can tell, you can say you said something. But more than what you said was how you said it. That is the stronger message that gets carried, right? So in classroom settings, we are so bogged down and all the kids are on us all the time and there's all kinds of stuff happening. And it's very hard to remember that every little word we say, every little glance that you give to a kid can have an impact on that child or on that student, right? They will interpret what you're looking at. You're looking at them as like, sure, you can have an extension if you really need it. You can feel like the Superman, red eyes going out there, right? So we have to be very, very careful and sort of measure our words. There is a lot of studies that were done on exactly this, how people said things. There's another study I'll tell you about a little bit later that has to do with not remembering. Candace, do you have a microphone? About not remembering what we say to students. There's a lot of research done. You have, and maybe you don't even realize, hundreds of conversations in a week, thousands in a year with students, and you don't remember most of them. But the students never forget. So you can have, I guess I'll tell a story now. Giordano did some research on this, and he didn't know what he wanted to be, and he didn't know what he wanted to study. And he was sitting one day in a classroom, and the teacher hands back a test, and he said, "You have so much promise in my subject area. I really hope you'll continue on. Good job." And in that moment, illumination. Here we are in a church. Illumination. He said, "I know what I'm going to do." And he studied that. And about 15 years later, he saw the teacher in a bar. I don't know why they're in a bar, teachers. But he saw the teacher in the bar, and he goes, "I think I'm going to, should I say?" Well, yeah. He goes up. He says, "Listen, I just want to thank you because, I was kind of lost and I wasn't really sure of myself, but when you told me that about my paper, I knew what I wanted to do, and I also studied, and I'm, I also got my doctorate in this, and I'm a teacher too now, and so just thank you so much." And what did that teacher tell him? Say back. Who are you? In that moment, he began a new set of research, which was fascinating. Giordano did research. It's called "When We Don't Know That We're Teaching," was basically the title of his article. It's conversations that we have with students that are between 5 and 25 seconds long that we don't even remember and they don't ever forget. And they can be positive and they can be negative. They can ruin people's lives, as we saw before. It's like, look, don't even try. You'll never get that pole vault. You tell that and you've just deflated them totally. If you say, but small words of encouragement have the exact opposite effect. I know you're finding it hard, but you know what? You have got such a good head. I'm sure it's going to come to you eventually. Just these teeny little 5-second or less exchanges that we don't remember have a huge impact on student learning outcomes. Go ahead. You wanted to say something? Or you're holding a mic for fun? Go.
We might be a little bit past it now, but I was just
sorry.
curious if those same studies with the tone and facial expressions have been done in a situation where you might have like American English speakers watching a video of a lesson being presented in Arabic or something like that.
Good. Because your presumption is?
That the tone perhaps might be different.
And?
It means something else.
Yes. Exactly. So there are studies related to, there's a whole other field that you'd love. It's called cultural neuroscience, which tries to weed out what are basic human reactions to things and what have a heavy cultural influence. And yes, how the proximity you stand next to somebody, how loud you talk. Americans are always loud, right? So we have, there is cultural neuroscience, which actually does expose that. It does not detract from this particular situation because within USF, University of San Francisco's laboratory, you had people of all races, but they were all Americans, and so I think their presumptions about distance and tone of voice were pretty much the same. But it's a great area of research. There's a woman named Chow who's doing a lot of stuff in this area right now. If you're interested, write me and I'll send you some stuff. But it is a very, very, very good question. So if you have kids from different, not racial backgrounds, and here this has to do more with culture than race, okay? Super important. You know, in Hawaiian culture, the way you are in this context should not be influenced, it should be based on the human interaction because we all are sharing pretty much same cultural values. But if you have an exchange student coming over from Japan or China or something like that and they actually feel so out of place, it might be because of those things. So, good point. Okay? Next one. This is my question to you. How many of you in your teacher training have been taught these things about body language and tone of voice things and face things? You did get some. Was it within a college course or professional development structure, or how was that done?
Both in my graduate teaching and in my student teaching.
Great. Where did you go to graduate school?
Bank Street College of Education.
Yeah, good one. Okay, so there are places that are doing this, but most people, I think you kind of get this on the fly. You start to learn this by trial and error, how kids react to you or whatever. Having said all of that, there are also individual exceptions. Some kid who might not have a good home situation might also have other problems. We know the studies, and it's very sad to see this, but kids who react inordinately stressed by tones of voice changes, like high tones of voice, are ones that have been abused at home. And so you can see some of these reactions faster in kids who already are wary of those things. Okay, so next one. All brains, this is a very tough one. All brains are prepared equally for all tasks. What you're thinking on that? We like to believe that everyone can succeed, right? What does that mean?
On the last point, isn't there, how good are kids at judging body language and then facial expression?
Actually, there's a lot of things that are innate in humans as far as, it's kind of, for example, you can get even newborns after 8 weeks actually will do spontaneous smile things for feelings of joy. But they will also mirror, they begin to mirror. So for very little, people, they get a pattern based on their context. So if you've always been shown that laughter expresses joy, okay. But if they've been told that every time dad comes near them, then they create that pattern. They think that's normal. So those things are early learned responses, and it's really something that kids do from the get-go. Yeah, it's fascinating. Okay, now this is every teacher's dream, right? We want to. We always believe. We believe now. There's this one thing you can guarantee. You can tell your kids at the beginning of the year, everybody here is going to learn. But what you cannot tell them is everybody's going to reach the same milestones at the same time in the same ways. We know that that's true, right? So all human brains will be learning, right? But here's where this very tricky concept comes in, and it's called epigenetics, which has to do with this combination of nature and nurture, right? So you are born with a set of genes, a potential to do certain things, right? But based on the environment you are in, certain genes will be potentiated or not, and they will be activated and you will be able to do certain things. But not given that experience, then you won't activate those genes, right? So basically the way you are, your phenotype, the way you are to the world is based on this combination of what you're born with and then the context you're in that allows you to potentiate that, right? Which is why it's so fabulous that kids can be in a rich learning environment with wonderful stimulation, especially within school contexts, because they're there generally more time focused on learning things within a school context than they might be within the home. The home can be a poor environment, but if they come to a school environment for more hours, which has a strongly stimulating context, then they can actually override and maximize their own personal potential, okay, based on this. So this is kind of one of those sad things. You know, sometimes people might not be born with certain potentials and things that you might have as school expectations. Maybe they can do other things, but maybe the school doesn't value that, right? So maybe, so the fact that everybody has gifts to give, but they're not all the same and they're not all academic. And so we have to look at this big combination here between what happens in your external environment and what happens within, the genes that you've been given. Does anybody have questions about that? Because this is probably one of the most complicated, it's the oldest question, the whole, are you who you are because of nature or because of nurture? And the answer is? Yes. It depends. It depends, because some people have actually overcome their environments, which is fascinating to me. Everything lays out that this person born in this zip code, this, that, and the other thing should be a nothing. And then they shine. And then you say, how did that exception happen? And so some people can actually outdo their environments or maximize the use of their environments to make up for what they weren't born with. Okay? Are we okay? It's a big concept. So if you have questions about that, do let me know, because this is probably one of the biggest and most classical questions. And this is why, you ask, do schools work? Schools work because of this. Because you can create different types of environments for kids that will help them maximize their potentials, okay? What does this mean about how to teach? When we say that if everybody got different brains, if we say that not everybody's going to be able to do all the same things at the same time, reach the same milestones, what does this tell us about things like, general testing requirements that we have? Or what does this tell us for the biggest question, I think, which has to do with rehearsal time? We know that since all new learning passes through the filter of prior experience, what many kids might need is just more rehearsal. For example, how many of you have ever taught a child how to read? Yeah? Good teachers. You've taught a child how to read. Now some of you will realize, you spend weeks or months and you finger the words and you say them out loud and you have this talk with them and you go back and forth. But then, literally, all of a sudden, they read, right? And that's a miracle. Did that happen in that moment? No, you laid down those foundations, you got those 16 neural networks primed, and boom, that kid can eventually read. Well, what happens if, and we know there's something that's really tragic, it's called a 30 million word deficit between kids who come from impoverished homes with no books versus kids who are read to a lot. Their preparation level, the kids who are read to a lot, are just ready to go. They get to school and they are ready to do advanced order thinking. But if they have not been read to, they don't have vocabulary, because part of being able to think is to be able to express yourselves. How many of you think in words? Pretty much? Some of you? This is a whole Vygotskian thing. The complexity of your vocabulary is a good reflection of your level of thinking. Totally scary when we think about current politics, but this is so in this sense, then, having a lot of enriched vocabulary, being able to, one of the things, how many of you work with really little guys, 3 years old little guys, right? One of the first things we try to get kids to do is to use your words, right? Because part of this whole thing, I know what I'm feeling, right? But if you give the kids the vocabulary and then cause and effect, I understand you're feeling angry because Peter took your ball. Okay, what are you feeling? It's called anger. What happened? Cause and effect. He took the ball, you feel angry, okay? So helping kids develop that kind of sophisticated vocabulary helps a lot. So key question here, which is very, very difficult, is that kids who come from deprived home environments who might not have a very strong foundation, it's not that they can't get it. It's just that they haven't gotten it yet, which means additional experience is what's needed, nothing else. They're not dumber, they just need more enriched contact and experience, which we depend on you guys for, right? So this is part of the idea. What does this tell us about our teaching? Can they all learn? Yes, they can. Will they all do it at the same pace? No. It's just based on their prior experience, okay? Okay, sleep is important for learning. Now, you all said yes. Your question is now, why? Can you tell the person next to you why you think sleep is important for learning? I think that woman right there is dying to talk. No, let's see. Let's see. Or maybe we should go to the other side. We haven't gotten anybody on the other side. Let's go pick on the other side. Let's see. So what do you think about this? Do you think sleeping is important for learning? Why do you think so?
Because your brain needs to be rested so that it can tackle all the tasks and focus on the tasks. Otherwise, you're like, oh, I'm so tired and it's not sticking in my head.
Great. Can I ask you to answer this? Okay, some thoughts here. And I want to give here's a small parenthetical hint to these responses before we ask you to answer this. Remember I told you that all learning depends on one of two things. It depends on two things. Memory and attention, right? If you don't have memory, you don't have attention, you don't have learning. So why would sleep be so important for learning?
I think the attention part you just brought up, because if you're tired, then it's not going to stick in your head and you can't pay attention because you just want to go to sleep.
Exactly. So attention is compromised when you don't sleep enough. Anything else? Another angle to this? This nice lady in pink.
I think sleep is the time when your brain encodes the information. What am I using? What do I need? What can I prune away?
Excellent.
So it's that whole process of pruning.
Excellent, excellent. So it's both things. Here's the idea is that this is Robert Stickgold in 2006 discovered that memory consolidation due thanks to a unique combination of neurotransmitters that occurs only during dream state, really. This combination of neurotransmitters helps cement that connection. You have to sleep on it to really learn. Now you can prove this to yourself. How many of you ever had students who said, oh yeah, Mr. Jones, I stayed up all night studying for your test, right? And they do the test, and they do great. And then you ask them the same question 24 hours later, and they don't know the answer, right? You have to sleep to consolidate memory. And you have to dream to consolidate memory. But you have to sleep to restore the body. Unless the body feels like it can be, we are at a stage of alert, we are able to focus and pay attention, right? That has to do with being well rested. That is definitely sleep. And that's about 75% of your time in sleep and dreaming is spent sleeping, right? In deep sleep, you have about 25% of the time. But about 25% of the time is spent in what is a dream state. And that state is unique because it has this combination of chemicals that bathes your brain and that is needed to consolidate memory. Now here's the crazy thing. If I made you stay up night after night after night, if I didn't let you go to sleep, right? Normally, most humans who are generally average rest, you go down, you go into alpha state, and you go into deeper sleep, and then about 90 minutes later, you'll come up and you'll go into your first dream state. And then you'll go down into another 90-minute cycle, and you have about 3, 4, 5 of these during the night, right? If I deprive you of sleep for multiple days, what does your brain do first? If I let you then go to sleep, at what stage of sleep will your brain dive into? It goes straight into REM. It goes straight into dream state, which is strange because you'd think your body would want to refresh the body. But basically your brain is craving this missing neurotransmitters that haven't been fired because of your lack of REM sleep. So your brain will go straight into dream state. So there's also this other thing, if you guys ever are interested in this, anybody do or enjoy power naps? Totally. Here's for the power nap. Here's a very interesting concept. Sleep and dreaming are behaviors. You can learn to do it better. Like anything in the world, it's learned. You can learn to be a more efficient sleeper. You don't have to sleep the way you do or dream the way you do. Which also has a lot to do with studies that have to do with productive sleep. You know, how do you give yourself a problem? You know, people who go to bed with a problem and they wake up with a solution? Like, how do you do that? Well, how do you give yourself the idea? What you dream is what you choose to dream. You guys decided. I'll give you a concrete example. 3-year-old son, Mateo, he went through a stage of having nightmares, right? I said, Mateo, get it. You are the only one who controls what you dream, okay? So if you don't want the what's in there? He goes, there's a monster, there's a monster. If there's a monster, tell him to get out. It's your dream, right? So Mateo's like, yeah, okay, yeah, sure. A 3-year-old, right? He just took us in, and the next night he didn't wake up. And I said, what happened? Did the monster come? And he goes, yeah, the monster was there. But I turned around and told him he should get out of my dream, but he was gone already. I was like, okay, great. Remember that. Anything you want to dream is yours. You decide what you're going to do with it, right? Now, to learn, if you can teach a little 3-year-old to do this, you can teach adults other things too. The idea is that we don't think enough about sleep. Teachers don't think enough about sleep. Teachers don't get enough sleep, but they don't even think about why it's important, okay? Motivating your kids, get a good night's rest. The SAT was not silly when it says, what can you do the night before the SAT? Sleep. I mean, there's a lot of research behind this. It's better to consolidate what you already know than to try to learn new things when you're tired, okay? Okay. The problem is that we also have this idea of sleep hygiene. And this is something that I will speak definitely at home to tomorrow with the parents, because it's something that you basically don't have a lot of influence over. Like, you don't have bedtime routines. It's not in your realm of responsibility. However, sleep hygiene is something that is learned through modeling, okay? Do we give the right signals to kids? Your bed should be for one of two things. Your bedroom should not have TV, should not have devices, should not have anything. Your room, that's a sacred space there, used for just those two things. If you can begin to get this is called sleep hygiene. You teach your kids how to keep themselves clean. You should teach them how to have good sleep patterns as well. That is one of the best gifts you can give a human being, is to help them learn how to sleep correctly, okay? Okay, stress. Does stress impact learning? Is stress, okay, ask your neighbor, is stress always bad? No. This is better than a chorus. Are you doing it just because we're in a chapel? It's good, it sounds good. We know that stress, for the good and the bad of it, when it's positive, it's called eustress. When it's negative, it's just stress, okay? We know that stress it actually definitely influences the way you learn. The problem is that humans have to be at least a little bit stressed to learn, right? Or they're asleep. Is anybody got a neighbor who's asleep? Anybody sleeping? Nobody's asleep. So basically, we've hopefully successfully reached this level where we don't have anybody so relaxed that they're asleep, right? But we don't have anybody who's like totally nervous. When I get close to you, you're not moving away like a lot of times. People think, you're going to ask me a question. So this nice spot of being able to have enough attention, alertness, focus, without having this level of anxiety, okay? That is that beautiful sweet spot, right? The difficulty is that not all people have the same level of stress response, right? Some people are more stressed, more easily stressed by certain things than other people, right? So do you have your finger on the pulse of your class? Do you know which kids you can definitely go up to and approach and say, hey, listen, I'm going to call on you next, and you're not freaking out, right? Because I know you well enough to be able to do that. Do you know your students well enough to know what levels of stress really tip them over into that place where they're so stressed they won't be able to learn? Remember, we mentioned high levels of stress, anxiety, or depression create a combination of neurotransmitters which will not permit learning, okay? But how do we get people so into it that they can focus and be able to learn, okay? So stress does influence learning, but both positively and negatively. So our main idea is, are we taught how to manage that in the room? We're always taught how to do a lesson plan, how to deliver, what goes first, what goes second, how to keep attention. But are we taught how to manage stress levels in the classroom? That's a big one. Okay. Human brains seek out novelty as well as patterns. Please answer anything but D. Ask your neighbor, novelty and patterns, what does that mean? do you think? Good. Okay, remember we mentioned before, all new learning passes through the filter of prior experience, right? Okay, so one of the very interesting things that your brain does, and this is a huge, you want to know the key to teaching? Analogies. Your brain, when some kid doesn't know something about a specific content area, creating analogies helps them. And this means it's showing them a pattern of something they already know and putting it next to something they don't know, right? So your brain naturally looks out for what is a pattern. We have it as probably so because what your prior experiences are influence what patterns you can see or don't see. In human behavior, in mathematical problems, all those things. So your brain is always looking for patterns. But it's also looking for novelty, which is very, very important because novelty is the teaching moment. It's what I don't know. Oh, I get this other stuff, I've seen it, but I don't understand. Why is adding different from subtraction? Oh, there's that different symbol. That looks different. Just asking a kid, what's different about 2 plus 3 is 5 and 5 minus 3 is 2? What's different and what's the same? Just asking that helps them get to that level of cognitive understanding about those different concepts, okay? So we know that human brains are always looking for patterns because they use them for predicting behavior, predicting what they're going to do and what other people are going to do as well. If you've ever read The Three Little Pigs to a kid, by the time you get to the third pig and you say, oh, what do you think is going to happen? They know, right? It's prediction because they've seen a pattern of behavior of that wolf, right? So they know what he's going to do next, right? So being able to predict is part of pattern recognition. Okay, this makes important, it's important in the class because novelty is what breaks the pattern and it calls attention to things. So what if these big buff guys in the back who are all the sports coaches, what if they showed up in a tutu one day? That is novel, that is totally novel, right? Now that might be something that would call attention to the players and they were like, hey boss, what are you doing? No, we want you to understand how important it is to have smooth transitions and fluid movements. So we're going to work on that today. And so sort of calling their attention to something that's a skill set that they want them to learn by dressing differently or whatever could be something that helps. Novelty helps. But don't do novelty for novelty's sake. Your job is not to be the clown, okay? It's to use the things, the tools that actually fit in to your learning objectives, okay? The brain changes constantly with experience. This is only to see if you've paid attention to the very first thing that we said. All new learning passes through the filter of prior experience. And the key idea here is you may not accept it right now, but I hope you believe me. All of you, I hope, are going to go to bed tonight with a different brain from the one you woke up with this morning. If you learned anything at all. That would be the whole objective here, okay? But this is very important because there are learning cycles in this, okay? You have to be able to allow for the downtime, and we're going to get to that in just a second. How many of you feel pressured to cover material in your class? Raise your hand. You feel the time pressure to get through stuff. Yeah? Here's the big error that we have in education is that covering the text doesn't mean the kids learned it, right? So part of this idea is this cycle of learning requires exposure, usage, but also some downtime. You know, think about it, mentally digest, sleep on it. Tomorrow, when I ask you some questions, if I were to ask you something, you should be able to tell me the things that you truly learned, right? But if you just bam, 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 drill things into the kids' heads without giving that downtime, that's not going to happen. So we're going to have some downtime here in just a second. Last one here, the brain is highly plastic. Yes? Flexible. Yes? You can always learn new things. Yes? My grandma, who grew up here, Gladys Zakai, what a wonderful woman. She actually tried to learn Spanish when I got married, and she was like 79. But she had this spirit, which is something many young children don't have. Dare to err. She could care less if she made a mistake. She was just going to do it. What's that again? Estoy. No, abuelita, estoy. But she would just try. And she just embraced any new learning. There was nothing that was wrong because she had the right attitude about evaluation. Getting corrected was just a way to speed up her learning, okay? The idea is that your brain is highly plastic. You don't stop learning until you die. And this means two things. One thing has to do with many of you, I don't know if you've ever met somebody who had a stroke and recovered. So you can have damaged brains that can repair by using other circuits, alternate circuits. But this is also just the definition of learning. All learning just is it shows you plasticity in the brain, and you measure that in neuroscience by white matter tract. What's the difference between white matter and gray matter? You've heard of both of those, right? The gray matter is the cell body. It's just a cell, the body of the cell, right? But the white matter are the connections, the dendrites, the connections that are covered in a myelin sheath, which is kind of like this fatty thing, and so it looks white. That speeds up the transmission between groups of neurons, okay? So enhanced white matter tract is how we measure plasticity, okay, and learning in the brain. Okay, okie dokie, plasticity. These are some just extreme examples of plasticity. We're not going to have time for that. And then this big value question here about the fluidity of intelligence. You guys might feel frustrated. You think this kid, is it possible for the brain not to learn? The brain cannot not learn. The brain is it's its natural state, is learning, okay? The problem is that we have to motivate people to learn the things we want them to learn, because your brain is always learning everything, but maybe it doesn't want to learn, the periodic table. So it has to be motivated to have a new learning for academic content. Okay, so critical periods we already talked about, and what I want to do is to jump to the very end, because I'm going to ask you to do something for me right now. Whoops. Oh, you guys have your cursors. Yeah, there are 200 and something slides. Yes, that's true. Yes, you did do this. Wait, where is it? Where did is it this one? No. Oh, your ups and my downs are the opposite. Okay. Okay. The myths, I'm not going to talk at all about those myths right now, because I do want you to know that if you are available to come, I'm going to talk all about neuromyths tomorrow night with the parents. But I want to summarize here, because I do want to wrap this up in a way that ends up being takeaway information and usable knowledge. If it's just a good time and you had nice pastries and you sat and saw new friends, it doesn't mean anything to the lives of your children. But if you can operationalize this, it's very important, okay? So what did we try to look at? Of these things that we looked at in this true and false quiz, or these categorization of quizzes, I hope you took away at least a couple of core ideas. One is that learning depends on the quality of a kid's prior experience, and they will be different. They're going to come into your classrooms with maybe different types of enriched experiences, and you have to use that, right? It also depends on the quality of sleep and dreaming. It also depends on the kid's nutrition. It also depends on appropriate stress levels, and it depends also on novelty and patterns in your classroom, the way you organize your classroom, faces, voices, affective, cognitive relationships. But it also is shaped also by an appreciation of this balance between emotional states and cognitive preparedness for learning. That's also very important to take into consideration. It's also dependent on differentiated instruction and evaluation. Understanding that is a unique brain there, and what does this brain need to get to my level of mastery that I'm looking for in my class, which will not be the same as your neighbor's brain. The days are over of when I teach, and if they learn it, it's their fault. This is where our craft has actually elevated. The demands on teachers are so much different now than they were a generation ago, because the kids have content knowledge at their fingertips and a telephone. What they don't know or have is the way to use it and why to use it. And we have to up our craft as well. This is the art and the science of teaching. We have to know the science to be able to deliver in a different type of a way than before. We also have to give them sufficient space for repetition. This is why I'm very pro-technology. I love having something like a flipped classroom where the kids can have the content information, review it as many times as they need it, have support material, go back to it, can repeat 100,000 times if they need to, a quiz, retake it, ungraded quizzes, but just get a perfect score. Those things help reinforce learning and to differentiate in a very important way that is necessary for classes now in current situations. And also understanding the context of concepts, as we were talking about. What cultural concepts can be different, but what does a kid learn here in Punahou, how is that applicable in real life situations around the world? How can you bring that out and make it more applicable in multiple contexts? Okay, the homework that I'm going to give you, I'm giving you two things. One is kind of a total option, and this is the total option. The other is total obligatory, so listen carefully. The option is this. You have access to a video introduction of the information from my book that talks about 50 different interventions that you can apply in a classroom. You also have access to something that's sort of a general checklist. I'm already a great teacher because I do this, but I could be even better if I did that, okay? So the idea is identify what you personally want at this stage in your career as a teacher, what you want to work on to improve, and then choose one of these 50 interventions that you'd like to apply within your own context. And then let me know. Tell me, and I will support you, I promise. I will be there to help you along the way to see how that works in your own classroom. How does this make a difference? Am I a better teacher because I've done this differently? That would be the goal, okay? In order to do this, so basically, we talked about the science and the art of teaching. We've looked at this idea of new areas of discovery in neuroscience that should impact teaching. We looked at different ways that neuromyths can be detrimental. They can cause harm, that we have to avoid those types of things. We also talked about just inviting you to continue in this whole idea of looking at mind, brain, and education. Now, what I've just told you, that's optional. You decide if you're going to take that in and apply it, and I hope you all will. The obligatory piece is this. On any piece of paper or on any laptop or any device or on your telephone right now, I'm going to ask you to do an exercise that, where's Ali Marimoto and James? They're so used to this because we would do this after every single exercise. Remember I told you that the cycle of learning requires a bit of downtime. What just happened? What did I get? What did I not get, right? Because many of you, when we finish here, you'll stand up, you'll head out the door, somebody wants another cup of coffee, somebody's going to rush to the bathroom, somebody's going to do something else, you're going to talk, and you're going to see somebody you haven't seen all weekend long, you want to talk, and it vaporizes. So right now, there's an exercise that's called 3-2-1. This is great also for your classroom. What are 3 things that you heard this morning that you didn't know before you came in the door today? 3 things that you learned today. 2 things that you found so interesting that you're going to take the time to research more, or you want more information, or you're going to talk to somebody else about it. And 1 thing that you will sort of promise yourself, and I'm going to do this differently tomorrow. I'm going to change my practice a little bit differently. I'm going to do this differently tomorrow based on the information. 3 things you didn't know before you came here, 2 things you're going to continue to research or talk about, and 1 thing you will change about your practice. Please take about 5 minutes to write that down. 6 different sentences, please. okay? Last thing, sorry, we were taking pictures. I was saying, I've never given a talk in a church before. Can you take a picture? And it's like, they're so well behaved. I got to do this more often. If you're so well behaved when you're in a church, this is a very good setting. And it also gives you this power up here. I'm afraid to step up here, though, but I was thinking this is a good position here. Last thing is to take the one thing that you will change and just tell the person next to you, because the minute you say it out loud, it's a promise. Just very quickly, this is the one thing I'm going to change. Just tell one person. I'd just like to make a small recommendation, and that is, as you go forth, with your classes and you jump back into the rooms tomorrow and you start thinking about this, don't lose these ideas, embrace them, and also the people you just spoke to. The best learning takes place in learning communities, and maybe you want to lean on those people you're sitting next to later on when to remind you of how to stick with this. But also, although at a distance, I do respond to my emails all the time, and if you do feel the inclination and want to get back in contact, write to me. I'd love to know how I can support you, because I think this is the most important thing we can do in society, is to work on modernizing teaching to respond to these demands that we have right now. So thank you so much for your attention today. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. It was incredible, deep learning for us. So we're going to spend I forgot to introduce myself at the beginning. I'm Emily McCarran. I'm the Academy Principal here at Punahou, and I'm delighted to introduce my partner principal, Junior School Principal, Paris Priori Kim.
It's my honor to extend our deep gratitude to Tracy, who is the quintessential fair weather maker. We are benefiting from months of her work with our design team to create the best conditions for our learning today. So thank you for calling us to the joyous, healing, humanizing, and effective practice with our students that we will enjoy as we depart from this place, and for fueling our learning and moving us to the powerful changes that we can effect through that. In a few moments, we're going to move to Case Middle School to continue our learning together. And I'm going to ask Maureen McLeod, one of the fantastic members of our fantastic design team, to call your attention to and engage your memory with your early experiences of our conference website. So Maureen's going to reacquaint us with that.
Good morning, everyone. So we decided to go paperless with this, and I'm looking. Thanks. And so we sent everyone an email last Wednesday from professional programs, and it was, of course, there are two things we want. PSB. Okay. So we've designed a digital program so that there are two components that we think are super important to point out. The first is that we've got all of your individual personalized sessions accessible through our program, and then our research librarian, Deb Peterson, has basically curated all of the amazing things that Tracy has shared with us into, it's organized by the facilitated sessions, but all of that material is accessed or available to you. So there's two things I'm just going to quickly show you. If you go to the focus sessions and you're not sure where you go, you can click on this little form that says, oh, sorry, it's psb217.weebly.com. Sorry, 2017. So Punahou. So psb2017.weebly.com. Go? Okay. If you look across the drop, so the program and everything is there, but we've got, if you look under the focus sessions and you're not sure where you want to go, on every page you'll find a thing that says click here, and that will pop up a PDF document, and you can control search your name. I just did Paris because it's easy. And then it'll tell you what session you belong. So Paris Priori Kim is going to helping students become autonomous in their learning. Thanks. Okay. If you don't want to go tech way, we've moved the registration table down to Case Middle School, and Deb Peterson will be sitting. She's waving. Deb Peterson will be sitting there, so you can go to her and she'll help you find your session. The other thing I wanted to share with you just quickly is our resource guide that Deb created for us. Sorry. There we go back. And so this is, and also for the teachers who are not from Punahou, this is not behind a firewall, so this is accessible to you as well. And it's collection of curated.
It's killer. If you
Yes.
haven't seen it yet, you have to look at it.
Yeah.
Killer.
So yeah, thanks, Deb. She works tirelessly for like 3 weeks pulling all this stuff together. So it's all sorted by the sessions you're going to. She's added TED Talks and videos. She's pulled a bunch of Tracy's research and sorted it all out. So by all means, use this really good work. And thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Mo. Because learning is a social enterprise, I'm going to ask you all to do two things. The first, before you go, please, if you don't know the person that you're sitting next to, please introduce yourself before you leave the chapel. And the second thing that I'm going to ask is that if you are, we're so lucky to have folks visiting Punahou today. We're really, really happy to welcome you. If you are Punahou faculty, please do, as we ask our kids to do, be a buddy to someone who needs a buddy and extend your help and assistance to anyone. Look out for folks that might be lost and make sure that we all get down to Case Middle School together. So please find yourself a buddy. Before we depart, I just want to remind you of Tracy's charge to us. We want to extend our learning into practice and commit to trying something new. Just want to remind us of all of that. And another point that I really took to heart was that she's asking us to be fully cognizant of all those moments that we are teaching and all those moments that we have to teach. And I hope that you engage with one another in every moment that's possible for teaching and learning today. So embrace the day. Embrace the power that we have to change society and to impact the world. Enjoy yourselves and have a good day. Sorry. Backing up. Rewind.
Two quick things. Let's see. The next 3 sessions that you'll have today, just for clarity, because we did have to change the time slightly, and I think this change took place earlier this week. The 3 times of the next sessions are 10:30, 12:45, and 2 p.m. So it's 10:30, 12:45, 2 p.m. So that's, make sure you show up at the right time. The other thing is that Tracy has offered, for those of us who are on this campus tomorrow, she's offered the opportunity for her to come and speak to your students. Renee Chang, are you in the house right now? Renee, how should we contact you? Okay.
Sorry.
Okay.
Thanks. Sorry, team tag. Thank you for picking that up, Darren. That was supposed to be my announcement. So we haven't quite worked out the logistics, but we do want to create moments for kids to intersect with Tracy. So if you might be interested, this would be between 1 and 3 tomorrow afternoon. Just email Renee. It's rchang@punahou.edu if you're on this campus. Between 1 and 3 tomorrow. rchang@punahou.edu, and then we will figure out how best to do that for you and get back to you. All right, embrace the day now.